Hello again, everyone. Melth here with a different kind of Advance Wars content this time. While making my recent video about getting no casualties on Drake's mission Navy vs. Air, I commented that Drake has really changed a lot between Advance Wars 2 / Reboot Camp and the way he is in Advance Wars by Web. And he's far from the only one. In fact, more than a dozen COs were changed for Advance Wars by Web. But apparently nobody's ever made a video about that before. In fact, there's a common misconception I want to dispel that COs are the same in Advance Wars by Web as they were in Advance Wars 2 / Reboot Camp. I'll provide some timestamps so you can jump ahead and look at whatever COs you're most interested in if you want to. It seems to me that since they were already rebalancing COs, they should go further. After all, a full third of the cast are outright banned in competitive play, and several of the surviving ones are so wretchedly bad that people only play them as a joke. As if that wasn't bad enough, the few decent COs are divided into several different tiers of very different power. After 20 years and hundreds of thousands of games, we have a mountain of evidence backing up these tiers. This leads to a lot of mirror matches, and to a lot of games where only one or two COs are even viable. In short, I think some rebalancing could really freshen up the game. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just making more COs more viable on more maps more of the time would be a huge improvement. So I thought I'd share my thoughts about not just how the COs already were changed for Advance Wars by Web, but how I would have changed them further. To my mind, the best power level to balance the game at would be roughly the top of what is now Advance Wars by Web's Tier 3 to the bottom half or so of Tier 2. In that general range, COs tend to have interesting and distinctive abilities, but they also have some limitations and drawbacks. And I think that makes for the most interesting matchups overall. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you out there have your own thoughts about the best way that COs could be balanced. I look forward to hearing about that in the comments. But in the meantime, everyone is entitled to my opinion. So let's start with the CO that gave me this idea, Drake. He was changed a lot between Advance Wars 2 / Reboot Camp and Advance Wars by Web. In Advance Wars 2, he has plus 10% defense to his naval units, which is nice, but because naval units don't really see much play, that's not very consequential most of the time. Furthermore, there's no terrain on the water most of the time for that defense to get added up with, just kind of open seas on most maps. That's why he wasn't really that good. Now, they buffed him quite a lot in Advance Wars by Web, in several respects. So one, they made his area unit detriment be smaller. Only 80% firepower instead of 70% firepower for his area units. So he's not anywhere near as weak with cartridges as they used to be, which is nice. I mean, they're still bad, but they're a lot better than they used to be. Also, his naval unit defense was increased a lot, from 10% to 25%, which is actually consequential even without any terrain to stack it up with. So I do appreciate that. And overall, that brought him up to being about near the top of Tier 3, which I think is a pretty good point for a CO to be at, so I wouldn't really change him very much. If I was to change him, I think what I might want to do would be, currently he's almost the only CO in the game who interacts with the fuel system. What I might do would be, play that up and make that kind of a unique means of attack for Drake. Make, perhaps, instead of draining half of current fuel, his steel power and superpower drain half of your maximum fuel. Instead of using Typhoon, you could do 2 tsunamis. And that would threaten to drain almost all enemy fuel. Of course, they would see that you're building up, they'd know that you could now do this before you actually had a chance to do it. And they could have 2 turns basically put people onto cities and rotate them off and on to get all their fuel back, or build APCs and things like that. But it would at least be a consequential threat rather than being something that doesn't really matter most of the time. Could be interesting at least to have that be part of the game. So Kindle is a CO who did not actually exist in Advance Wars 2, only in Dual Strike, but was changed in Advance Wars by Web nonetheless. Her superpower does 2 things normally. Number 1, if you send any kind of capturable property, cities, ports, comm towers, labs, whatever, you get a massive attack power increase. Number 2, no matter where you are on the map, you get plus 3% attack power per property that you own of any kind. Okay, pretty good. In Advance Wars by Web though, the first part is unchanged, but the second benefit is only 3% per city that you own. Now in most maps, that's a fairly small penalty overall. Cities are almost all the properties on the map. But on some rare maps that use things like ports for a lot of the income, it hurts her a lot more actually. Airports and so forth too. Now, it doesn't matter too much just because high society or superpower doesn't see that much play. She's really more of an urban blight most of the time, but it is a nerf to her. Overall, I think that's okay. It makes things interesting, at least different properties work in different ways for her. And overall, she's kind of at the top of Tier 3 anyway, which is an okay place to be, so I wouldn't change her, I don't think. Now another CO where I feel like the changes they made were pretty strange is actually Flak. Flak, of course, is their Advance Wars 2 early game punching bag. Just kind of a weak joke enemy CO who gets pummeled and is pretty terrible. In Advance Wars 2, his luck range, instead of being 0 to 10% like most COs, it's actually 0 to 9%, I'm going to say 10% for shorthand. Anyway, instead of that, it's negative 10% to plus 15%, which on average is just worse than 0 to 10%, so he just is worse than most COs day to day with no compensating advantage whatsoever, so that's why he's terrible. In Advanced Wars by Web, they made him better. Now instead of being minus 10% to plus 15%, it's minus 10% to plus 25% luck. Okay, fair enough I guess, except he gets banned all the time because he's a luck-based CO. So why, if you're going to ban all luck-based COs, would you make him more luck-based? I agree that luck-based COs should be banned most of the time. I think what I would do instead would be make him not be totally luck-based anymore. Give him some actual strength to bring him up to being actually playable. Now, with Flak, we got a lot of memes about things like indirect bombers, or him talking in the early game about how tanks are the best because they hit hard and they move far. So let's maybe lean into that a bit. I think what I'd do first of all would be give him back his Advanced Wars 2 stats. So he's got a small but generally bad luck range. If that's okay for Sonja, it's probably okay for Flak too. Shouldn't get him banned. But then give him an actually really good strength too. He says tanks move far. Okay, you know what? His tanks, anti-tanks, and neo-tanks all move +1 movement. That would be humongously valuable, opening up a lot of first strike threats or just better reinforcement rates. Very, very powerful. Helping to compensate for that quite big weakness. Then also for his CO power and superpower, what I would do is instead of having them just enhance his luck range, none of that anymore. Luck range stays unchanged. Instead, give him indirect bombers, and for that matter, indirect every other direct combat unit too. With your CO power, probably increasing the price a bit, all your direct combat units can now attack at 2 range, but at a major firepower penalty, and they can't move and attack, they can only just sit still and attack. That would require some strategy on both players' sides to play around, but it would open up totally new avenues of attack for Flak. It would feel very unique. You could maybe style it as him just being very reckless, just kind of aiming his cannons wherever and just shooting recklessly and hoping to hit something. And the important thing would just be that it would make him totally unique while playing into what is supposed to be about the only thing we have about him in the lore, as it were. His superpower probably do the same thing, but increase the indirect range to be 2 to 3 squares. So you can either attack at full power at melee range, or you can attack at 2 to 3 square range, not moving with your direct combat units, but doing about half damage. It'd be totally unique at the very least, and I appreciate COs that are just different and change the game, and people think of in different ways about how to play around them. So I think that'd be worth a try at the very least, compared to the current system of just banning him. Perhaps the CO who changed the most in Advanced Wars by Web compared to the cartridges is Sturm. Which is appropriate, because if you've played the cartridges or Advanced Wars Reboot Camp, you probably noticed that they changed a lot in those too. I mean, in Advanced Wars 1 multiplayer, he has 80% attack and 120% defense. But in single player, he has the reverse. And then in Advanced Wars 2, he has 120% attack and defense all the time, and just stupendously overpowered. So, he's quite different in Advanced Wars by Web than he is in either of those games, actually. He's totally unique. In Advanced Wars by Web, he has his Advanced Wars 1 multiplayer stat line of 80% attack, 120% defense. But then he's got both his Advanced Wars 1 Mini Meteor and his Advanced Wars 2 Super Giant Meteor, but then unlike Advanced Wars 2, it doesn't grant attack and defense bonuses, and so really he's just totally different in every way. Also, thankfully, they changed the targeting of his meteor to not be luck-based anymore. In the cartridges, his meteor could target one of 3 things chosen randomly every time that he used it, which made it totally unpredictable. It could target the enemy unit that has the greatest conglomeration of enemy unit value around it, or the same thing, but multiplying the value of indirects for some insane reason, or target the most HP damage it can deal. Again, chosen randomly, which is not appropriate for a strategy game, I would say. So a good thing that they made it now just be consistently targeting the enemy unit that has the most enemy unit value around it, deducting out your own unit value because it can hurt your own units, so that makes sense. So great change there, but the fact remains Sturm is pretty overpowered. And he's the first CO with whom we need to talk about things like COs being kind of map dependent and also a bit mode dependent. See, Sturm in Advanced Wars by Web is usually tier 1, that is top tier, in Fog of War, but usually banned outright in standard play. Now, he doesn't really benefit that much from standard versus Fog per se. I mean, he loves recon, so he already has a lot of those floating around in Fog most of the time. True, he can't aim his meteor as well in Fog, because he doesn't know if the enemy has a good bait for it or not, but the meteors are a pretty small part of his game plan, and you just kind of need to assume that they have bait for it anyway. Now, the bigger problem that he has that makes him too good in standard is just the map-making meta is very different for standard versus Fog of War maps. Standard maps tend to have a lot of heavy terrain, and they tend to have a lot of mountains, a lot of rivers, a lot of forests, things that Sturm really loves. So there's a lot of good things he can put his units on for defense bonuses to stack those up, and also, most importantly, his infantry often get insane capture chains on maps where things like mountains or rivers are meant to be the main obstacles. So I think to bring him down to reasonable levels, he's got to get nerfed. He'll always be map dependent. There'll always be some maps that he just kind of breaks, I think. But we can at least make him more playable on more maps. I think what I would do would be, number 1, bring him down to 70% attack power. that will help offset the fact that defense is more important than attack and give him a real weakness. Number 2, and most importantly I think, although he should keep his fun special movement for his vehicles, he has to lose that for his infantry. That really breaks a lot of maps, and there's just no recourse against it. You can plan around things like him having early recons to harass you. You can have a tank out in time. That's possible to play around, but him back at his own home base, just having his infantry run at full speed across mountains and capture things that you can't capture, there's no counter to that, and that gives him a huge economic advantage on many maps and just absolutely breaks them. So he has to lose that for infantry, but to keep it for vehicles, I think. I might also consider giving him one small buff. See, currently Sturm has a couple problems. One of them is he doesn't have a way to close up the game very fast. Even if he's winning, it'll tend to be a very, very slow, kind of boring win. And number 2, his super meteor sees very little play compared to spamming out his mini meteor to get the attack and defense bonuses more often. I might say, during your super meteor turn, get an additional maybe 20% attack power, bringing you back up to a standard amount of attack. That will mean that even if the enemy baits it, you at least get something for your 10 stars. And more importantly, it gives you a way to close out matches, especially things like mirror matches that are really, really slow. So I think that would be okay if it's balanced out with those other changes that I talked about. He'd still be very map dependent, some maps would be too good, but at least it'd make him more reasonable, I think. There are really a lot of black hole COs on this changed list. Coming up next is Sturm's dollar store replacement, Von Bolt. Von Bolt, despite being too good already, was inexplicably buffed and made even stronger in Advanced Wars by Web. So his superpower was changed in 2 ways. Number 1, it can't hurt himself anymore. He used to be able to at least impair his own units, now it can't do that. Number 2, it's no longer random at least, so that's good. Now it targets consistently the greatest cluster of enemy value. Unlike Sturm, doesn't need to be centered around a unit, but still, at least it's consistent. So that's really very strong. So how does one balance Von Bolt? He's usually the top of tier 1 on pretty much every map, and both Center and Fog, really. But the trouble is just that he doesn't really have a weakness to enhance. If you take away his day-to-day, then he just becomes really boring. So what does one do? Well, I think I've got a couple ideas. So number 1, his lore is that he's all about draining energy, he only cares about his own life and nobody else's and whatnot. So maybe make it so he gets worse repairs. Only 1 repair per turn instead of 2 repairs per turn. That's a mild, but real penalty to him. Number 2, he should be able to hurt himself with a superpower again. Number 3, and most importantly, maybe Von Bolt gets elite units, but some of them are slow. Maybe -1 movement to all of his direct combat vehicles. That would help make it so he kind of has to go from terrain node to terrain node, trying to stay in good terrain, but can't just charge forward at full speed. That would fit with kind of his game plan anyway, but it would be a real nuisance to him and make it harder for him to grab all the good ground in the middle super fast like he currently can do. If one wanted to change things in a more radical way, one idea though would be take away his defense bonus, give him instead 10% life steal. No other show in the game has that currently, but basically, at the end of damage calculation, whatever damage you dealt, if you're still alive, you get back 1/10 of that added onto your HP bar. So if you did 5 damage to the enemy, you gain back 5% HP. Mathematically, this is similar in value on paper to defense, but of course it doesn't stack up with terrain in any kind of useful way. So that would be kind of a penalty to him and make him a little bit less good at just holding onto the cities and things like that. And it also is more exploitable for the enemy. If they attack you in a way where you can't counterattack, either because you die, or because you just a bad unit type matchup, say if they attack you with a copter against your tank, you do basically no damage, therefore get basically no life steal. So the enemy could have some way at least to deal with you on their turn. So that would be a more radical change, but would fit with his lore and make him a bit more balanced, I think, overall. Either way could be good, I think. At least it'd be better than him just kind of dominating tier 1 the way he currently tends to do. So it probably won't surprise you to find out now that the last of the COs with a missile-type superpower, Rachel, was also changed in Advanced Wars by Web. But she is inconsistent now not only with the other missile-type COs, but also with herself even. So Rachel's first missile in her superpower now targets the greatest cluster of enemy infantry, and max, double counting ones that are capturing. Okay, fair enough, that's a fine way for it to work, I guess. Notably though, it can hurt her own units, and does not take that into account, even as a tiebreaker. So that's pretty weird. Then her second missile targets the greatest cluster of enemy value, but it does deduct out her own units, and it can of course still affect them. Okay, that one at least makes sense. Then her third one targets the greatest cluster of enemy HP damage that they can deal. Again, it can hurt her, but again, it doesn't take that into account, even as a tiebreaker. So absolutely bizarre. Her missiles are not consistent with one another. They can all hurt her own units, but only one of them takes that into account. every other missile CO in the game, either they can hurt themselves, do take it into account, as with Sturm, or they can't hurt themselves and take that into account properly, as with Von Bolt. So she is just absolutely bizarre, and I don't know why they would make her that way. In any case, she is okay on balance. She's usually kind of the middle of tier 3. I think she could use a slight buff. What I think I would change about her would be make her repair bonus more substantial. Instead of healing 3 per turn, heal 4 per turn. You'll really feel that. Now, it's kind of double-edged. Sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes it drains a lot of funds that you don't want drained. But overall, it'll be a buff, and at least make that little perk of hers matter more, which I think is a good thing to make her more interesting and feel more unique. Also, though, most luck-based COs are banned. For some reason, Rachel, although she has a luck-based CO power, is not banned, and that CO power has not been changed in any way. What her CO power currently does is it boosts her luck range from 0 to 10% to 0 to 40%. I think what I would do would be make that not luck-based. Instead of adding plus 30% to your luck range, just add 15 percentage points to your base damage in all attacks. Reduce, of course, as such things always are, just like luck is, by defense or by you being at low HP. So, make it mathematically work the same on average, just make it not be luck-based, and that would, I think, make her pretty much perfect if those other changes were made. And it would make her CO power take into account the fact that her own units can be hurt, or not be able to hurt them. One or the other. Make it consistent at least. Now, some people might erroneously think that those are the only COs that were changed in Advanced Wars by Web, but actually quite a few more ones were changed in other ways that are a little bit subtler. So the first thing to understand is that in Advanced Wars 2, when you use the CO power superpower, no matter what one it is, you gain 10% bonus defense. But in Advanced Wars 1, Dual Strike, and Advanced Wars by Web, when you use your CO power, you get 10% bonus offense and defense. So you might logically think that if you ported the CO over from Advanced Wars 2 to Advanced Wars by Web, now they get 10% more attack on top of whatever amount their CO power should normally grant when they activate it. But actually, sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. It's inconsistent. So, a strange choice there. Some COs do benefit from that. Some COs get kind of a stealth nerf. One or both of their powers don't get affected by that change the way it probably should. And it's not really logical either. Sometimes weak COs got nerfed, sometimes strong COs got nerfed, sometimes all kinds of things. It's weird. So let's talk about that. Let's start with Andy, who was affected quite heavily by these changes. So Hyper Repair gets a slight buff, actually, because now, of course, instead of having no stat bonuses of a generic 10% defense, it now also grants 10% offense, too. But Hyper Repair almost never sees any play anyway, so who cares? Hyper Upgrade is where it's usually at for Andy, and Hyper Upgrade got hit hard by this change. See, normally, when you use Hyper Upgrade in Advanced Wars 2, you get plus 20% attack power. Great. Well, in Advanced Wars by Web, then you should probably get 30%. But no, you just get 20%. So compared to people who did get that bonus, you are a lot less well off than you used to be. And this is really quite consequential. I mean, the amount is substantial, first of all. Instead of being at 30%, you're only at 20%, that's a pretty big difference. And also, it applies to every single unit. Most COs who got hurt by this little stealth nerf at least get the benefits of generic 10% attack to some units, at least some of the time, but Andy gets nothing. So he gets really hit hard by that. Overall, Andy is kind of near-ish the top of tier 3. He's in an okay spot. I might not change him anyway. But if I was to change him, I'd probably give him back his 10% attack during Hyper Upgrade. And I might also make Hyper Repair a little bit more viable. Like, currently just is pretty much strictly worse than Hyper Upgrade. Maybe make it repair 3 HP instead of 2 HP. It'd still be pretty bad compared to Hyper Upgrade, but at least it would be not strictly worse in terms of healing for cost, so it would be something to think about at least. Now let's get into a really weird one with Sami. So in Advanced Wars 2, Sami had plus 30% attack power for infantry day to day. During her CO power double time, it went up to 50%. During Victory March, it went up to 180%. Okay. So in Advanced Wars by Web, you would think logically she'd either go to 160%, 190% with her CO power and superpower, or would stay at 150%, 180%. But no. Nothing so consistent as that. No. Sami goes to 160% with her double time, and stays at 180% with her Victory March. So they just applied the bonus to one power but not the other power. Pretty arbitrarily. Now, Sami is a hard CO to balance because she's very, very map dependent. Some maps she'll just be stupendously overpowered, but most of the time, in standard play, she's usually kind of the bottom of tier 2. And Fog of War, she's usually toward the bottom of tier 4, actually, just awful. Now, why is that? Well, a little bit of it is because Victory March is a bit easier to use in standard, because you can see what properties are unoccupied, and then you're guaranteed to go out and capture them. But that is double-edged, at least, because the enemy knows which ones they need to guard and block. A bigger factor by far is just the way Fog of War maps tend to be set up compared to standard ones. As I said before, fog of war maps tend to be very wide open, and bases tend to be very, very far apart from one another. The upshot is that you end up with vehicles meeting vehicles before infantry meet infantry. And that's really, really bad for Sami, because her vehicles are terrible and her infantry are great. What she wants is the early game of infantry versus infantry fights where she can really prosper. On the few fog of war maps that do look like standard maps, like say Frozen Fire, she does extremely well, as you would expect, and rises from the bottom of tier 4 up to being like the top of tier 3 basically. So that kind of shows that it is mostly terrain that holds her back in fog, rather than fog of war itself really crippling Victory March too much, I would say. In any case, she needs some kind of buff, but it's hard to know what to do with her. On some maps she'll always be kind of too good, some maps she'll be too bad, but I think what I would do for her overall would be give her back actually her Advanced Wars 1 infantry stat line. 120% attack, 110% defense for infantry and max. That will give her harder to interrupt captures for sure, which helps her a lot. She'll have a harder time interrupting people herself on offense, but she'll still do okay at that job. Also do one more thing for her. Give her, with her indirect units, which are currently kind of her only non-weak units, make them actually be good units, plus 10% attack power. Not a big buff, but it gives her something she can do beyond the infantry versus infantry fight stage. Now she'll have good, tough infantry walls with 10% more defense, and good artillery behind them. So that gives her an option that isn't just infantry and mechs as her only good units. I think I would keep actually her double time at the same power level, so going now from 120% up to 160%, so a large bonus for double time, which currently doesn't see much play, so that'll make it more viable. And I might keep Victory March at 180%, basically. So still don't give her those instant kills that she would love to have, but at least that will overall, I think, make her a bit better. She'd go from being bottom tier in fog to being hopefully, tier 3-ish, something like that. It would be a buff to her in standard, but she is kind of the bottom of tier 2, so she could be buffed a bit there and still be okay. Again, she would still be a bit map dependent though. It'll be hard to make her perfect in every single map. So the last of the Orange Star trio, Max, actually gets 2 sneaky little nerfs in Advanced Wars by Web. So first of all, he does get the generic 10% attack power effective penalty compared to everybody else who did benefit from it. In the cartridges, Max Force took it to 140% attack, Max Blast to 160%. Now, instead of going to 150, 170, he just goes still to 140, 160, so compared to those who do get that benefit, he is worse off than he used to be. But more subtly, there's actually a bug with how pipe seams work in Advanced by Web that really hurts him on any kind of map that has a pipe seam. See, in all the games, with pipe seams they take damage as if they were MD tanks on roads. Okay. In Advanced by Web though, they take damage like Neo tanks on roads. Now that actually doesn't hurt most COs very much, because most COs break those things with artillery, and it takes the same number of turns as it turns out. But with Max of course has garbage artillery, so he can't really do that. Of course, in the games it didn't really matter, because in the games he was a pipe-breaking machine, because his Neo-tanks could instant kill them, and so could his bombers. Now though, pipe seams take so much less damage from MD tanks and from Neo-tanks that he can't kill them even with his superpower with a Neo-tank. So he is really, really a lot worse at breaking pipe seams now. Like his only option basically is to get out a bomber, or an MD tank wastes 2 entire turns, which are precious for an MD tank, just slowly breaking one out. So that is really pretty bad for him in any kind of pipe seam map. That, of course, is a pretty rare thing for a map to have a pipe seam that matters very much, but when it does matter, he is much worse off than he would be. If I was changing him, I'd probably take away that bug, make pipe seams work the way they're supposed to. But other than that, Max is okay. Even with the stealth nerf, that's fine. He's kind of the middle of tier 2, that's a fine place to be in, I would just leave him as he is. Fittingly, Max's Blue Moon counterpart Grit is affected similarly to Max by some of these changes. First of all, both its CO power and superpower, neither of them benefit from the 10% generic attack increase, so that's a little bit bad for him compared to anyone else who does benefit from those things. But also, the pipe seam math is kind of bad for Grit now too. It used to be he could consistently break a pipe seam in 2 shots with artillery. Now it actually takes 3, unless he has a calm tower. Then he can still do it in 2, so he's not hurt anywhere near as badly as Max is, but he is hurt by that at least. Overall, Grit remains probably overpowered. He needs to be nerfed in some way. He tends to be banned outright in Standard, and he tends to be usually tier 1 in Fog, occasionally dropping to tier 2 if the map is really bad for him. So, Grit is always a map-dependent CO, and therefore hard to balance. But what he really loves about Standard, above all, is just there's so much heavy terrain and so many natural choke points in Standard maps for him to hide behind. That is what Grit is all about. He can so cost-effectively hold out at a choke point, and there's no way to deal with him very well. Fog of War maps tend to be wide open, with almost nothing for him to hide behind and no choke points whatsoever, basically. So that's pretty painful for Grit. It doesn't help that he has to buy some recons to see anything in Fog, but that's a smaller deal than just having no good terrain to hide behind. So all those things help bring him down from being broken to just being very good in Fog. So he needs to get some nerfs overall. I think I might first of all give him back his Advanced Wars 1 infantry penalty, or maybe a weakened version of it. Maybe instead of 80% firepower, only 90% firepower for his infantry. Make them a bit weaker. That'll hurt his early game and it'll make it easier to harass him in the early game. That's beneficial overall. That's when he's supposed to be weak. Secondly, I think to fit with his lore of not being at all a city person, and to make it harder for him to form indestructible walls in the late game, I would say, okay, his units on cities and other terrain like that, cities, bases, ports, whatnot, get weakened defense. Only 10% instead of 30% defense for being on a city or similar property. That will, number one, make him more harassable in the early game, which again will make his early game weaker. Number two, it will also make it so that he is going to have a harder time making invincible walls in the late game. Because an anti-air can wall break an infantry that only has 10% defense, but not one who has 30% defense, basically. So it'll make it harder for him to form indestructible walls with his artillery behind them just creeping forward later on. I might consider rebalancing the costs of his CO power and superpower a bit. Currently superpower sees almost no play, it just kind of ends up being a worse deal than the CO power, but overall I think he's in an okay spot once those changes are made. So let's talk about Eagle. Eagle does kind of suffer that stealth nerf to his CO power and superpower in some respects. That he doesn't get the generic 10% attack increase to his air units is a little bit bad for him, but the thing is, his CO power never really saw any play anyway. At least not in this form that it had in Advanced Wars 2. And his superpower, you didn't really get that for the air units in particular. Yeah, the air unit stat bonuses were nice, but really, just getting a double move with all units, whether the ground or air or whatever, that's what you got the superpower for. That part is unchanged, and in fact, whereas in Advanced Wars 2, his ground units did not get any kind of attack increase whatsoever during his superpower, now his ground units do get the generic 10%. It's only his air units that kind of don't get that, and so you might even say superpower might even be better overall now. That's probably okay. I think Eagle's at an okay balance place. It's usually, the middle-ish of tier 2. That's a fine general range to be in. If I was to change him, I think I might want to make his CO power not as worthless and try to give him back some mechanical ability to fit with what his lore and personality are supposed to be. He's supposed to be this daring, reckless flying ace, but he is the opposite of that in terms of how you actually want to play him. The best strategy with him is to be extremely stally and defensive, and not even care about air units that much compared to ground units. Just mass vehicles of any kind, ground or air, stall as long as you can, then do a devastating superpower. Kind of the opposite of how he's supposed to feel. What I might do for him would be maybe make his CO power, for a similar price, 3 stars, something like that, grant extra turn to only his air units, but give them a major firepower penalty, like 50%, something like that. So that would make it so that you can do things like run in, attack, and then run back out. But you couldn't really do a prolonged, double attack with them. And it would only affect air units, so it would give him at least some benefit to his air units, and give him some opportunity to feel like he's, an aggressive CO in the early game if he wants to. It would still probably be a worse deal most of the time than just saving for his superpower, but at least it'd be something you could threaten sometimes, and it would fit with what he's supposed to be like. But as I said, overall I think he's at an okay place as it is. Another Green Earth CO who I like a lot is Jess. And just like Max, who she's very similar to, Jess suffers a fair amount from the changes in Advanced Wars by Web. Her CO power does not get the 10% attack power increase to her vehicles, so that's pretty bad for her. And she was already a bottom tier CO as it was, so they made a bottom tier CO even worse. Jess definitely needs some help. A lot of people talk about taking away her infantry penalty to make her better. I disagree with that. That would make her pretty boring, I think. What we should do instead is keep that penalty, keep that unique or almost unique badness for the infantry. Make her vehicles actually be good to compensate for it. I think to make her different from Max and be a lot stronger, I would take her vehicles up to 20% attack power, 10% bonus defense. So, defense bonuses are quite rare, give her one for her vehicles. That will make her a lot better, it will make her different from Max who does not get the defense bonus. And I think I might also maybe change how her CO power and superpower work a little bit. Again, to make them different from Max, who she feels very samey with currently, perhaps give her a smaller attack power increase, but give her maybe more movement to fit with her themes of, they have names like turbocharge and overdrive, she restores all her fuel and whatnot, so maybe make her burn a lot of fuel too, but just driving really fast, something like that. So maybe give her, with her CO power, maybe +2 movement, but almost no attack increase, with the superpower +3 movement and some attack increase. Something like that at least. That would give her a pretty unique role, make her feel different from Max, and be a lot better overall compared to how she currently is in bottom tier. So at the opposite end of the power spectrum, we of course have Kanbei, who is almost always banned. He is sometimes allowed in high funds, but even there he's still usually top tier. Now I haven't talked much about high funds up until this point. It is of course its own game mode with its own player base and whatnot, and its own tier lists, which are mostly similar, but there are some major differences too. The thing is though, that high funds is played so much less than Standard and Fog of War, that I feel like it's probably worth getting the balances right mostly for standard and fog, and high funds can have its own tier list if it needs it. In any case, returning to the Kanbei, both the CO power and superpower do not benefit from the generic 10% attack increase, so that makes him a bit worse. So that's fine and good though, because he's overpowered as it is. Now, when people talk about balancing Kanbei, they often suggest just taking away some of his bonuses, making his defense bonuses be smaller and things like that, like they were in Dual Strike or Advanced Force 1. I don't really like that much. Again, I like it when COs have big strengths and big weaknesses. What I would do instead would be make his weakness a lot weaker. Make his units cost not 20% more, but 50% more. That'll make it hard to even afford infantry in the early game. It'll really slow him down a lot. He won't get his vehicles out for a long time, he'll rely upon his high quality infantry, and even throughout like the end game or whatever, he just will struggle to afford expensive units like MD tanks and whatnot. He'll have to make do with really high quality versions of cheap units like infantry, tanks, artillery, and things like that. Which is what he's supposed to be about, really. He's supposed to be about just having elite, but generally lower attack units. So this will fit that. It'll give him a real weakness that can be exploited, but also keep him with real strengths, like super good defenses on good terrain and things like that. I might also maybe change morale boost. Currently it's kind of just a little bit worse than Samurai Spirit pretty much all the time. Maybe make it give a bigger attack increase to Samurai Spirit, so at least it's some value, like maybe 10%, something like that. But mostly I think I would just change his prices for everything and leave him otherwise unchanged and see how things shake out. Now of course Kanbei learned from the best. Sensei is also in banned tier almost all the time. Sensei is a CO that I really would like to see unbanned, because he's so unique and interesting in how he works. But he's just too good. And I would say he's overall a bit stronger in Advanced Warfare Web than he was in Advanced Wars 2. True, his helicopters don't benefit from the generic 10% attack increase, but it does benefit things like his infantry, because they technically did not get an increase before during his CO power and superpower, and now they do. And he's really more about the infantry than he is about the copters anyway, so overall I'd say he's probably stronger now than he used to be. So that's pretty terrifying for a CO that's already overpowered. Now, since his day-to-day is pretty good, the super strong infantry and copters they're a real threat, but they can be played around. You know, all Sensei's good units are kind of weak to anti-airs, so you can deal with that. Challenging, but you can deal with it. It's his CO power that is really overpowering. Just spamming out that many free infantry out of thin air every couple of turns for only 2 stars is absolutely stupid. Now, it's very cool to be able to spawn those free units. I don't want to take that away from him entirely, but the 9 HP infantry every single city, every couple of turns is just too good. I think what I would do would be increase the cost to maybe 4 stars rather than 2 stars, and decrease the HP value the infantry start off with from 9 HP to 5 HP. 5 is kind of a key number. See, a 5 HP infantry, even during a CO power with that defense bonus, on a plains gets guaranteed instant kill by enemy infantry that has a comm tower. So even during your CO power, you can still get wiped out if you try to wall with your new infantry, so you just can't wall with them basically. That will help make them a bit less overpowered. It also makes it so they take now 4 turns instead of 3 turns to capture things. But you could join them up and get a 10 HP infantry out of it that way, but just having the number of guys you got effectively. I think that would overall be a good improvement for him. You double the price of the power and you decrease the value of what you get out of it, but keep it overall its unique role of just spamming lots of guys onto the map. And you can then choose whether to join them up and get half as many guys, or whether to do something else with them. I might make his mech spammer cost a bit more too. Currently doesn't see much play, but infantry rose in price and mechs did not. I'm sure mechs would see more play, so maybe bring that up to 7 or 8 stars, something like that. So those are all the COs that were changed in Advanced Wars by Web, but there's still a few more to talk about balance changes, Joe. Let's start with Hachi, since he sells the other COs to us. It's no secret that Hachi is the top of the top COs, the most banned of all the banned COs. He's just too darn good. He needs to be weakened a lot. Now his day-to-day is just quite good. 10% better prices and everything is really, really powerful. It's probably not on its own so overpowering that keeps him out of tier 2 necessarily, if he was balanced in some other kind of way. After all, it's kind of comparable in value to something like Sasha, who's the bottom of tier 1. So I might leave him with that price decrease, maybe make it a little tiny bit less good, but something like that is okay. Where his real power lies is of course in his CO power and superpower, above all his superpower. I think what I would do would be make them actually cost an appropriate amount. Right now they're way underpriced, and also make them do different things, rather than merchant unit just being a better version of barter. I like it when CO powers and superpowers are different and have different jobs. I think that's more tactically interesting than the superpower just being a more expensive, more powerful version. That's just kind of a math problem to optimize. It's not really a strategic choice. So I think I would do is barter cost 6 stars. So double its price. Have it halve prices as it currently does. Now you can generate a lot of value that way, especially if you save up some money from a previous turn to then also double. But in terms of value you can generate from that, it's going to be comparable to what you get from just a 6-star superpower or something like that for somebody like Max. So, should be balanced-ish, I would say. And there is also a tempo loss to be considered when you try to do things like save up money, turn after turn to then double it. Like, you could do that, but your opponent might take a lot of ground in the meantime when you don't have any reinforcements coming. It's a trade-off at least, rather than being a no-brainer. So that's okay. Merchant units should probably cost at least 9 stars. You can deploy units out of cities, but they don't have decreased prices. So if you want to get decreased prices and generate value that way, barter. Want to deploy on the front lines from your cities and get tons of guys at once, merchant unit. But you gotta choose, you can't have both at once. That'd make him, I think, more interesting and hopefully more balanced. Probably be like a high tier 2 CO that way. You might need something like a little nerf, but it would be, I think, a big step in the right direction to make him more interesting, as well as more fair. So at the opposite end of the orange star power spectrum, we've got Jake, a CO who I really want to like. Mechanically, that is, he was a really annoying character. Now, what I like about him is just that he grants such unusual bonuses with his CO power and superpower. You know, the CO power grants +1 range to indirect units. Only Grit has +1 range to indirect units, so that's pretty unique. And Grit has it all the time rather than just showing his CO power, so I like that. I also love that his superpower grants different bonuses to different units. You know, it grants that range increase to indirects, it grants +2 movement, but only to ground vehicles in particular. It grants, you know, attack bonuses to everything, including air units and whatnot, so different units benefit in different ways rather than just having one that is objectively the best, you know, beneficiary of his CO power and superpower. So I appreciate that about him. But he's not really good enough. He needs a buff. He's usually the top of bottom tier. I think what I would do would be, number 1, make his day-to-day bonus better on planes. 20%. Also, make it so planes don't slow down units that have tires, like recons and rockets and missiles. Make them move full speed over planes. That would be a big buff to his rockets in particular. And maybe let them actually see some play, which they don't really get much of in Fog of War, generally speaking. Because it would synergize now with them being now fast for him, and also getting that range increase too, doing his CO power and superpower. That would be pretty nice, I think. I'd also power up those powers, I think. Make the plane's attack bonus during his CO power go up to 40%. Then I think for his superpower, it'd actually bring that up only to 50%. Now there'd be a trade-off of, do you want to get most of the power, most of the damage that is, from just using your cheap CO power, or do you want to save up and get the movement bonuses and things like that, and a bit more power during your superpower, rather than just current superpower is almost always the best one to use. I like trade-offs there. I like when they're good for different things. So let's finish up Orange Star with their Commander-in-Chief, Nell. Now Nell's a CO who's always banned, but not really for raw power, like someone like Hachi is. Really, she's banned just for being luck-based. Power level-wise, she's comparable to someone like Hawke day-to-day. If you compare something like, you know, tank versus tank fights with plus 10% attack like Hawke has versus just better luck like Nell has, the result is about the same. She's worse off than Hawke at things like, say, anti-air versus infantry, or whatever, where you have high base damage. But she's much better off at things like infantry versus MD tank, where you have terrible base damage. So, you know, overall, I think she's probably slightly better day-to-day than he has, but not by a huge difference. So, if it's compensated for in other ways, it could be balanced. I think I would give her to be the counterpart of her sister, worse repairs. Her units just kind of count on luck to get things through. They aren't used to repairing guys, so give her maybe only 1 repair instead of 2 per turn when she's on properties. Number 2, her CO power and superpower are too good currently. They should probably go up to 4 stars and 8 stars respectively, something like that. And most importantly, make her not be luck based anymore, so she can get unbanned. So she should hit in the middle of her luck range basically. So keep generic 10%, you know, luck that all COs have, then add onto her normal damage plus 5 percentage points once her day-to-day. Like with the superpower, keep her normal luck range, 0 to 10% like any other CO, but just have her also hit in the middle of the new range that she would normally get. So she'd still be mathematically about the same, but she'd be predictable. Very, very strong with things like infantry shooting heavy units, with battlecop shooting heavy units, things like that. She'd make certain unit matchups unusually powerful compared to how they normally would be. It'd be a fun CO to play with, I think. So, Blue Moon's boy wonder Colin is also a broken tier CO. Kinda like Hachi, he's just too darn good at buying units at too low a price. So, Colin is supposed to be balanced by having weak units day to day, but he really, really doesn't. It's just silly. You know, 80% price units, paid for by only 10% attack power penalty and no defense penalty. That's an incredibly good deal. But he also has a really, really overpowered CO power. Costing only 2 stars, multiplying your money by 50%, which you can compound if you do it multiple times in a row, is just insane. So that needs to change, and his day-to-day needs to change too, to make him both more balanced and more interesting. I think I would say, Give him 80%, 80% units. Bad attack, bad defense. Defense is pretty horrible to lose out on an advanced force, so that'll really help make up for his cheap units. It'll make him play with a lot of high-tech units like things like MD tanks, which are supposed to be things he's good at anyway, because they don't really take more damage from attacks because the base damage is pretty low to begin with for most things anyway. So they'll kind of make him play to his strengths rather than just being good at everything across the board. It'll make him more harassable, make him have a harder time walling, and really make it feel like you have a lot of like cheap but weak units. His CO power should probably cost probably 4 stars for what it does. It's a very powerful CO power, given that you can save up money for it. But that would now be tougher than it used to be, because now there'd be a real tempo loss because you're getting overrun on the front lines with your weak units where you're not building things. So I think at 4 stars in price, it could still be viable and pretty good, and that would bring him down to a reasonable level, I think. Power of Money is quite potent. It would probably see more play if Gold Rush was weakened, but you couldn't really hoard up money for it with total impunity like you currently can because you'd have weak units on the front lines anyway. So I think that would be a strong superpower, but overall a balanced one if he was made weaker in those other ways. So, the last of the money COs, Sasha, is the weakest of the lot, but that's not saying much. She's still in Tier 1, usually the bottom of Tier 1. So what do we do to balance her? Well, I've got a couple of ideas. We could keep her day-to-day more or less unchanged, and that would be okay. It's not in and of itself so overpowering that she has to be in Tier 1 for that alone if she had other weaknesses. What I think we could do, though, as an alternative would be, make it so instead of getting money per property, she just gets back money when she does damage to people in battle. Like her superpower, but just day to day. So that way she doesn't get an early start that's better than anybody else, she just gets, when fighting starts, she then gets more money at that point. That would be different for people like Hachi or Colin who truly get a better start, basically, in terms of what they can afford. So that could be interesting, I think. But we could also just keep her as she is, basically. Just make her be 10% more money per property. And I would probably make it truly 10%, so it's the same in high funds, as a standard, rather than just being plus 100 per property. Anyway. The other thing I would do, I think, would be make Market Crash cost 3 stars rather than 2 stars. Make War Bonds, which currently sees almost no play, cost 5 stars rather than 6 stars, which is also kind of an indirect nerf to Market Crash. Because currently she can save up a lot of bar and then you Market Crash several turns in a row. Now she couldn't really do that very well anymore. If she had 5 stars for her maximum and her CO power cost 3, she couldn't easily use it 2 turns in a row. So that would hurt her ability to delay people's CO powers forever, and make her be more painstaking and careful when she uses her CO power. I might also change the formula for it, so instead of deleting out people's gauge based on their maximum gauge size, it deletes out part of the power gauge based on their current gauge buildup. That would make her a little bit less oppressive against people like Eagle, who have a really big gauge, while keeping her similar in matchups against people like Max and whatnot, who have a smaller gauge. So I think that would overall bring her down to a more reasonable level and make her, rather than currently she kind of auto-wins certain fights and just is not very good at all in other matchups, that would make her have a more even matchup, I think, against a lot of COs, at least overall. She could still delay the important CO parts like Lightning Strike a long time, which would hurt people like Eagle, but she couldn't deny them forever. And she'd have to think carefully how she does it, at least. It'd require a bit more skill. So it would be an improvement at the very least, I think. So, last and least of the Blue Moon COs, we've got Olaf. Now, I make no secret, I think Olaf is really boring and I don't like him at all. But he doesn't need that big a change. He's a little bit overpowered currently, he kind of just dominates Tier 2 most of the time, so he should be nerfed a bit, but not that much as I don't like him. I think I would just give him a slightly more expensive superpower. Winter Fury costs 8 stars rather than 7 stars. That would be a more reasonable price, and give people like Eagle a better matchup against him. I might also change the price and effectiveness of Blizzard. Currently it sees almost no play. What if it costs 6 stars rather than 3 stars, but it caused snow for 2 turns rather than just 1 turn? That would give it kind of a trade-off with Winter Fury. You can get more snow but no global damage. And you can technically kind of do that currently with double Blizzard in a row right now, but it would make it a bit more cost-effective to do so. So it wouldn't really be a buff, it'd just kind of be a change, but it'd give it at least an option for Blizzard and be worth thinking about sometimes. Which I think would be more interesting than the boring, mindless, hit Winter Fury whenever it's available Olaf that we currently have. So, the last of the Green Earth COs is Javier. Now, I will admit my balance changes ideas for Javier are not really inspired. They'd be an improvement, but there could be better ideas out there. So Javier currently has an issue where he has to be banned on any kind of map that has 2 comm towers per person, because he's just too good. But in maps that have no comm towers per person, he's unusably bad. So a lot of maps he just can't be played, basically. But that's not too interesting. On maps where the comm towers are really contestable, he's also pretty bad usually. So Javier is very map dependent currently. I'd want to change that a bit, I think. Make him more viable more of the time. But his day-to-day is just really, really, really good. and it's hard to compensate for because we already have people like Sturm has elite units, but they have bad offense. We can't take away his offense bonus, it's too much like Sturm. We already have like Von Bolt now has elite units, but they have bad movement. Kanbei has elite units, but they are expensive. So what does one do for Javier? I think my idea for him would be keep his elite units, but make them a little tiny bit weaker. What I'd do is per comm tower, he gets the generic 10% attack and only 5% bonus defense. That's still something you'll feel, still make a difference, but it's less good than 10% of course. And it also will be more balanced when you have maps with multiple comm towers. Like 2 comm towers per person, he'll still be pretty good. But he won't be as overpowered as he currently is. It would also, I think, help to give him a better indirect resistance, like 40%. So you'll really feel that even when you don't actually have any comm towers or whatever going on, just resist artillery shells, things like that by 40% rather than 20%, and you can really shrug those things off. That would be nice. That'll give him a real perk even when comm towers aren't yet involved. Next, I think, I would change the way his CO powers and superpowers work a bit. They need to be nerfed a bit because he'd still be a little bit too good. But they also should be made better on cases where there are not the right number of comm towers. I think what I'd do would be have his CO power cost probably 4 stars. Have it double the effects of his comm towers, but at the end of that, add 1 more comm tower on. So if you have 1 comm tower, it's doubled, then you get +1, so you get effectively 3 comm towers. So you go up to 30% bonus attack, plus 10% generic, so 40% attack. And then you go up to 10% generic defense, plus 15% defense. Now you go up to 40% attack, 25% defense. A little bit better overall probably than his current CO power of 30%, but more expensive too, so that should balance out decently well. And the important thing is just that scales better when you have either fewer comm towers or more comm towers. He's still bad with no comm towers, but he's not totally worthless anymore. He gets something for it at least. And with 2 comm towers, he's still really good, but he's not invincible anymore. He's just really, really strong on offense during that turn. So that should be more balanced at least, especially if the price went up, as I said, to about 4 stars or higher. Superpower, probably the same thing, you know, triple comm towers, then +1 comm tower, probably costs 7 stars, something like that. As I said, there's not the most inspired Javier changes, but they would, I think, be an improvement overall, and make him more viable on more maps, rather than having to be banned or being useless. Orbiting back around Yellow Comet, kind of like a comet, Grimm is flashy and cool, but an omen of disaster. If you play him, it basically never ends well. On paper, getting 30% more attack, paid for with 20% bad defense, probably sounds okay. But in Advanced Wars, defense is more important than attack. I mean, for one thing, bad defense multiplies enemy luck damage, but good offense does not multiply your own luck damage. So basically, Grimm just suffers more that way. Also, the way it's actually trained is bad for Grimm too. You know, when you, as Grimm, attack someone who's on a city, right? You have 30% more attack, they have 30% more defense, but you eat that full 30% defense, impacting your bonus attack too. 1.3 x 0.7 is actually less than 1, meaning you do less damage than you would if you were a generic guy attacking somebody on a road. So, not really great. Whereas if they attack you, and you're on a city, you only have 10% defense basically. So it's kind of comparable damage overall, but that's before the fact that they probably have their own CO power bonuses going on. So like, it's like day-to-day you at best break even, and usually not even that. So, Grimm is just kind of bad most of the time. He can't wall break people as well as they can wall break him. He really just dies if people have movement bonuses, so he needs some kind of buff. I think I bring him up to 150%, 80%. So really good attack, still bad defense. And that might be enough to actually make him a bit more viable. For his CO power, keep it at its low price at 3 stars. Have it bring him up to 200% attack. So just, he kills things left and right with that thing. Still no movement bonus, still maybe bad defense. Like maybe he doesn't even get a defense bonus, just stays at 80% during his CO power. Then for his superpower, I think I would probably have it be still at plus 200% attack power overall, so same as his CO power, but give him +1 movement and give him back his defense bonus. So you can choose, do you want to get cost-effectively a lot of attack, or do you want to wait for that movement bonus at a doubled price, essentially? I think that would be a real trade-off to consider, at least. Hopefully that'll make him a bit less underpowered. So, Sonja, a CO that I really want to like, but just don't, because she's luck-based and her CO abilities are kind of a grab bag of unrelated nonsense. I think, first of all, I would change her to not be luck-based anymore. It doesn't fit her character, it doesn't fit with anything, it's not really mentioned or explained in the games. It's pretty strange. So I think what I would do would be, she's very analytical. She doesn't believe in luck. In games with Sonja, there is no luck. She has none, enemies have none either. That's a net buff to her overall compared to how she currently is, of course. And it would actually synergize well with her counterattacks. People couldn't hit her as hard in offense against her, so her counterattacks will be even stronger. Abilities that work together. Crazy. Secondly, currently her hidden HP thing basically just doesn't matter, because In Standard, of course, you can just watch people move their units. Even in Fog of War, it doesn't matter though, because you can still read her fuel and her ammo, and worst of all, you can just read the CO power build-up bar to see exactly how much power you got and for how much HP she lost. So that makes it pretty much worthless, even in Fog of War. So I would say in games with Sonja, she hides her HP, and her fuel, and her ammo, and the CO power bar. You can see the percent that it's at, but you can't read the exact number off. That would make that actually matter. Even a standard that could at least give it some value, a little bit. You'd know roughly what HP her guys were at, but you couldn't know exactly anymore. Next, I think that her CO power needs to be made better. Currently it's useless, people just save for her superpower every single time. I would say give enhanced vision +2 vision range rather than just +1 vision range. And also, most importantly, have it create fog. So now she has an actual advantage in standard rather than just being only usable in Fog of War maps. Her superpower should probably stay about the same, you have +1 vision and so forth rather than +2 vision, but have it also create fog, so she at least has some options in standard play and isn't just limited only to being good in Fog of War maps. It should perhaps not surprise us that a lot of the black hole COs totally suck. Let's fix that. So let's start with Adder, say. Adder is supposed to be a CO who has really cheap CO power and a lot of great mobility. Inexpensive CO power is granting plus speed. He's supposed to be the fastest guy around, but he's really, really, really not. Like 12 COs tie him for CO power price and have better CO powers. Lots of people have similar movement bonuses to him overall. A bit more expensive in some cases, but like about the same price in other cases while granting the same amount of movement and also other perks too. So that's why he's basically bottom tier, despite getting a kind of a buff compared to Advancers 2, given that the generic CO power attack increase helps him a lot. So he needs more buffs. I think what I'd do for Adder would be have his CO power still cost 2 stars, but have it grant +2 movement. That would make him truly by far the fastest. He'd charge up fast and have an actually good CO power that would give him actual movement bonuses. Superpower, make it actually the cheapest of all superpowers, costing only 4 stars for +4 movement. It sounds pretty crazy. It would be pretty crazy on his mechs and infantry and whatnot, but he needs a humongous buff, and this would be a nice big one and it'd give him an actual unique niche of just being the fastest guy around. So that could be, I think, pretty good and pretty fun, and make him feel more unique than he currently does. Now, Koal. Koal's kind of hard to balance with Adder because they're too similar, basically. If you buff Adder, you don't want to buff Koal in the same way, or they'll just be the same CO all over again, which isn't terribly interesting. I don't even really know why Koal exists, because Adder already did the exact same job in the plot of being kind of a slimy mid-level enemy. But in any case, I think what I would do for Koal would be, number 1, make his day-to-day a bit better. 20% more attack power on roads. Roads would still be a sucky terrain type, but this would be some kind of compensation for being on them. It would be worth thinking about sometimes. Number 2, make his super power grant more attack power. 40% and 60% attack power on roads. Oh, and also, bridges too. Yeah, for some reason, bridges don't apply, so give it to him on bridges too. Most important though, to make him really unique, during your superpower for 5 stars, yeah, +2 movement, 60% attack power on roads, sure, whatever. But also, movement on roads for all your units, totally free. 0 cost. Move as far as you want on roads, no problem. Now, obviously there'll be some maps that'll be totally overpowered, like the map is just like a parking lot, but who really plays maps like that anywhere? On any kind of realistic map, it'd be pretty easy to balance that appropriately, I think. You could have it give them really good reinforcement routes, good mobility, but enemies can do things like block roads, and that would then be a thing that you want to do. You want to put your own units to roads to block Koal from using the roads to transport around super fast. Could be pretty cool, I think. Could be interesting. Again, some maps would matter, some maps it wouldn't matter, but it'd make him more playable more at the time and give him a unique niche where Adder is faster most of the time, but Koal is faster where roads are involved. I would like that, I think. Another CO who probably didn't need to exist, but does, is Jugger. He does the same thing as being Flak. He's just kind of a dumb, early game punching bag CO who just is weak across the board, pretty much. He's also luck-based, so he's banned for that reason too, as well as for just being bad. So how do we make him different from Flak, if we have to have him? Well, I think what I would do with him would be, make him not luck-based anymore. Have him function like a malfunctioning robot type thing. Sometimes he's really precise, sometimes he's way off the mark. Instead of having a big luck range, good luck and bad luck, alternate. Really good hit, really bad hit. Really good hit, really bad hit. Have him hit in the middle of his good luck range, have him hit in the middle of his bad luck range. Back and forth. Not just on your turn, but in the enemy turn too. So the enemy can now decide, like, on this attack, I'll reduce him to like 1 HP anyway. He won't really hit me back very hard. Let me have that be his good luck roll hit. This attack is crucial. I want this to be his bad luck roll hit. So both players have to strategize around what order to do their attacks and to maximize his good luck or bad luck and so forth. Could be pretty cool. And given that his good luck range is bigger than his bad luck range, it'll be overall, I think, a buff to the character. So it helped bring him up to a more reasonable level, I think. He would need to have better CO powers and superpowers too. I think for CO power, yeah, expand his good luck range, which is no longer luck based, and his bad luck range, but crucially, during the enemy turn, your luck is now just neutral. So they can't exploit anything anymore. You get your good attacks, you need to decide what attacks to make be bad ones, but the enemy just needs to deal with your ordinary attack rolls, basically. They can't exploit it anymore. During your superpower, bigger good luck range, bigger bad luck range, whatever, but you have only your good luck range during the enemy turn. That would be a humongous buff to that superpower. It'd make it kind of like, Samurai Spirit or Counterbreak. We just don't want to use an attack into it because you get torn apart. Although with different units being good in those matchups, like Samurai Spirit benefits certain units more than others, Counterbreak benefits certain units more than others, this would too. So that'd be pretty interesting, I think. That'd make him hopefully go up from being like bottom tier to being more playable, while being totally different from the new Flak at least. Alright, Hawke. Certainly a favorite CO for many people. He's just so cool. But he's also a little bit too good. He usually is near the top of tier 1, usually behind Von Bolt depending on the map. Some maps he's better, some maps he's worse. The thing is, he's supposed to have a good day-to-day, and he does, but have that compensated for with overpriced CO powers and superpowers. But that's where things don't really work out. His day-to-day is pretty good, but it would be overcomable. But his superpower is not overpriced, it's appropriately priced. It's a really strong superpower that costs a lot. So that just makes him too good. He has a good day-to-day, and then he also has a great superpower to win the game with. That needs to change. I think what I would do to play up his weakness is make him truly have an overpriced CO power and superpower. Make Black Wave cost like 7 stars, and make Black Storm cost like off the charts 12 stars. More expensive than Meteor, more expensive than Ex Machina. Make it truly the most expensive superpower in the game. Make it actually overpriced. Make it actually bad for its price, so it's a real weakness. Still a strong power, but a real weakness at last. And then, Lash, but not least, we have one of my favorite COs. Lash, sadly, has languished near the bottom of Tier 3 pretty much forever, at least in Fog. She's a little bit better in Standard where there's more terrain for her to use, but she's still pretty bad there. I think that she needs several small buffs to really play up her fun, cool terrain perks. What I think I would do first of all would be, every other terrain CO in the game benefits on their arrogance when they're over that good terrain. Koal with roads, Jake with plains, Kindle with cities, whatever. Lash is the only one who does not. Let's fix that. She should get her terrain attack bonuses with her arrogance. Also, unique to her, to make her stand out, I'd give her terrain defense bonuses to arrogance too. That would make her feel terrain focused for arrogance too. Nobody else has that. That would give her a unique niche right there. I'd probably also decrease the price of terrain tactics. Currently this is almost no play. Make it cost, let's say, 2 stars. That way it's somewhat spammable. Now it's still very situational. You probably still want to save it for prime tactics most of the time. But you can threaten that movement bonus pretty regularly. The thing about it is it's not always a movement bonus. It's inconsistent. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it's irrelevant. If it's cheap, she can maybe get a bit more play out of things like rockets that don't currently see much play, or recons or things like that. So that can be fun too. Her superpower is overpriced. It's really not that good. I think what I would do would be give it +1 additional star of defense after doubling everything. So something like a mountain doubles to 8 stars, then you add +1 more stars, that's +10% more attack and defense. Crucially, that would give her actual invincibility, which is capturing HQs, rather than just being at 90% defense. Not a big difference, but it could make a difference. It would give her a threat, kind of like Kanbei has with his Samurai Spirit. That little suite of buffs, it would hopefully bring her up from the bottom of Tier 3 to hopefully being somewhere in the middle of Tier 2, and therefore appropriately balanced. At least it'd be an improvement. Well, that was fun to talk about, and I hope it was educational too, about the differences between Advanced Wars Reboot Camp / Advanced Wars 2 and Advanced Wars by Web CO balance. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about these or your own balance change ideas in the comments. Thank you for watching, everyone, and a special thank you to my Patreon supporters: Illusory Thunder, Master Knight DH, Jackie, Advanced Warrior, Gregory, William Wakefield, Kenny Boggs, Danny Hall, Jeffrey Morse, Supreme Crimson Leader, and Enlino. Have a great day, everyone!